Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast. This is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 15. Just a reminder, with the holidays coming up, to order my books today from Amazon or Bear Manor Media. I just also want to announce up front to become a Patreon of Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help. Be a nice Christmas present for me and would help me to continue to do this podcast. Today's guest made a major discovery in legendary animation director Chuck Jones's vaults, a comic strip that was faithfully produced in the book Chuck Jones, The Dream That Never Was. He is also heading up the complete reprinting of Lynn Johnston's popular comic strip For Better or For Worse, and he works on various other projects for the Library of American Comics. Here he is, Kurtis Findlay. All right, on the phone I have Kurtis Findlay. How are you today?
I'm doing quite well, thanks. How are you today?
Good. Just wanted to know, I know you work on books for the Library of American Comics, but how did you get interested in all this?
Well, I have two main areas of interest. Well, I have lots of pop culture interests, but I love classic cartoons. Like, I'm talking old Disney from the 40s and, you know, the classic Warner Brothers shorts, Fleischer cartoons, all of this kind of stuff, right? I love these cartoons.
Right.
And I also love old comic strips. I've been a fan of comic strips since I was a kid. Those were the ones that I always took up from the library when I was a kid. Of course, like Calvin and Hobbes and stuff, but they also had old Dick Tracy reprints and that kind of stuff, and I loved them. And so I was looking for a project to kind of get my foot in the door in the animation world and among the historians. And I wanted to kind of do something, kind of like what you do with all of your books. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know what to do, what subject to do, because I didn't want to just write another book on Walt Disney. Like, who needs another one of those?
Right.
Exactly. And then you've got the cornered market on like Harvey, and so like there's I needed something specific, so I happened to stumble upon a little entry on Chuck Jones's Wikipedia page that said that he had a comic strip that he did for a period of time called Crawford, and I didn't know anything about it. I had no idea, and I'd even read both of Chuck Jones's autobiographies, and he doesn't mention it at all in there at all. So what is this comic strip? And I started doing some research and finding out about it, and contacting Chuck Jones's daughter and his estate, and eventually found out that the estate has these comic strips in their archives, but they don't know what it is either. And I'm like, okay, this is perfect. This is what I'm going to devote my time and effort to. So I found out as much as I could. I contacted the Chicago Tribune, who originally syndicated the strip, and found out that Chuck Jones only did this strip for not even 6 months in 1976.
Right.
And so it was fascinating. Like, he's so prolific in everything he does. Why was this so short-lived? Why did it not last? Was it his fault, or was it the syndicate's fault, or what? Like, why didn't it go anywhere? Mm-hmm. So I put together a book proposal and pitched it around, and the Library of American Comics, who I'd been big fans of for a long time, buying up all of their their Terry and the Pirates and Dick Tracy books and stuff. They liked the idea of publishing never-before-seen Chuck Jones artwork. So we made a deal, and I put together this book.
Okay.
It's called Chuck Jones, The Dream That Never Was.
All right.
And if you see it, there's the entire, we put the entire 6 months worth of comic strips in there. Most of it's shot from the original art. And the few strips that we couldn't find the original art for are taken from either newspaper tear sheets or in some desperate instances, it's microfilm. which, the quality is definitely not as good there, but it's better to have that than nothing.
Right.
And there's also a plethora of thumbnail sketches and concept art, and the best part about it is that as I was looking and doing the research for this comic strip, I found out that Chuck Jones had actually been trying to make a cartoon series about Crawford for a long time, starting back when he was still with Warner Brothers. It's a 27-year story. And so do you know, I'm sure you know the Adventures of Roadrunner
Yes.
TV pilot that came out. Chuck Jones had great plans for that show, and one of the plans, part of the plans was to include a kid next door to the two boys, Ralph Phillips and his friend Arnold,
Right.
Which they never, that's another thing I found out in my research, is that kid in that cartoon, Ralph Phillips' friend, has a name. His name is Arnold. But the kid next door was going to be Crawford.
Oh, okay.
And, yeah, that's where it started. And then when he was fired from Warner Brothers, he went over to MGM, and, of course, that concept never took hold, so he still kept this character of Crawford and started to develop a TV series all about Crawford for MGM. And had this huge plan, and I found so many notes and concept art and sketches surrounding this unproduced TV series that he was going to, and I write all about it in the book. And then that never went anywhere because eventually he moved on to other things as well, doing his own stuff at Tower 12, and then he did this comic strip for six months in 1976. And I talked to his editor of the comic strip and the newspaper syndicate and a bunch of people. No one really remembers why it failed. Of course, Chuck himself is not around for me to ask, so that's probably going to remain a mystery. But if I can be perfectly honest, the comic strip was not that great. So it's probably he didn't have the time or energy to fully devote, because, he was running his own animation studio.
Right, yeah.
And so that's kind of the story there. And I'm super proud of this book. It's really, I just love all of the artwork we were able to pack in. It's almost 300 pages. There's a complete storyboard sequence of a Crawford cartoon that was never made in Chuck Jones's very distinct timing and style. So that's quite enjoyable. There's a lot in there. So I encourage people who are interested in learning more about this unknown part of Chuck Jones's career, the part that he was so ashamed of that he never wrote about it in both of his autobiographies, pick up this book, Chuck Jones, The Dream That Never Was.
Well, I will tell you, I do have the book. It's sitting right next to me. I read it a while back, so I don't even remember. But I do remember what you just said, that it wasn't mentioned in the autobiographies. So it was a new revelation to me as well, even though I've been a long-time animation fan. The question I had, and I don't remember, I read it back when I got it, because this has come out a couple of years ago at least.
It was 2011.
Okay, more than a couple of years. Anyway, did he draw the strip shortly before he published it, or is this something he drew a long period of time ago, and then, let's see if I can syndicate it now because I have a time to do it?
No, he didn't draw it a long time before. He drew it kind of just as he was developing it for the newspaper syndicate. So I mentioned this in the book that he became friends with one of the editors in the newspaper and formed a relationship. And so the newspaper editor gave him the opportunity, said, hey, would you want to try a comic strip? And so he jumped at it. And that's when he decided to take Crawford and his friend Morgan, two characters that he'd been using before, for the comic strip. And so, I think some of the strips have dates. The strip started in January of 76, I think it is. And a few of the strips have little dates that indicate that it was probably originally slated to start in November, but then they pushed it back. So, sorry, I'm saying the wrong date. I don't mean 76. I mean 78. 1978.
Okay. I was going to ask you about that because I have the back cover in front of me. It says 78. I was going to say, you're saying 76. The book says 78. Which is correct?
No, yeah.
Okay, 78. Okay. All right.
78. Yeah, that's my mistake there. But yes, so some of them have the 77 start date. But then he wasn't doing that for very long before they started syndicating it. So he didn't have a backlog or anything like that.
Okay.
It was he was kind of doing it as he could, as he went along. And my guess is that he got a little too busy,
right?
And that maybe the readership wasn't into it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was just curious because some comic strip people shop the same strip for years and years and years, before they get a hit with it or something like that. But that's kind of rare too. Usually they'll revise or update it. They figure if it's not going to work. In the case of this, you said something interesting also, is that now Chuck Jones, I know, was involved with MGM and Tower 12 and everything, so he probably didn't have the option or opportunity to say, hey, let's make a little cartoon about Crawford here. But by the time this appeared as a strip, he was doing those TV specials like Ricky Tikki Tavi and Mowgli Brothers and all that stuff. Why couldn't he kind of wrestle control of his own studio and just say, we're doing this half-hour special at Crawford and that's it? Why wasn't even made for that?
Well, I think that probably MGM Network had a lot to do with that.
Okay.
I mean, this is just conjecture on my part because I'm not perfectly sure, but he developed this whole TV series. He was in the works, and MGM just didn't bite. They wouldn't put the bill, or they wouldn't air it, or whatever, because his deal with Tower 12 was kind of with MGM. He didn't really work with anybody else.
Right.
And as I was looking through, because I got the opportunity to go down and root through his archives down in California to do research for this book, and there are boxes and boxes of all of these unmade shows that Chuck Jones tried to develop while he was at MGM. And I put some of the artwork for some of them in this book, and you say you have it right beside you, so let me see if I can find a page for you to look at.
Okay.
Because there's this one, I put a picture of some dogs, and what is that one called?
Well, while you're looking at that, I will say this is a very handsomely laid out book, and even if you're not the biggest fan of Chuck Jones, if you're just a fan of newspaper strips or of animation in general, it's a nice, smart-looking book here, so it's very well laid out, and nice scans. You talked about a couple here being kind of from microfilm, but I haven't flipped to any of them yet. So overall, it looks really good. So so a microfilm example is, let me see if I can find one of those as well. There's only like maybe 3 or 4. They're not that many. But if you go to page, I'm going to jump back to talking about the unproduced shows. If you go to page 26 and 27, there's a show called The Unscratchables, which is, of course, a take on The Untouchables, and it's a dog. It's a couple of dogs. Yeah.
So there's that, and on page 26, I mentioned a couple of other unproduced shows. There was going to be he was working on a Droopy TV series, or maybe it was just a short called Trooper Droop, which he has there's a full storyboard in his archives of an unmade Droopy cartoon that he was going to do. Another Dr. Seuss adaptation based on the really obscure Dr. Seuss book called The Seven Lady Godivas.
Oh, yeah.
A Chronicles of Narnia animated series. There was just a whole bunch of stuff that he was working on that never saw the light of day.
Wow. Well, going back on the Unscratchables, it almost looks like the dog father for DePatty Freeling, so I don't know if he was snooping around over there and say, hey, there's an idea. If I kind of twist it around a little bit, maybe I can do this. I don't know.
Or maybe it was a coincidence, and Patty Freeland got to it first, and he's like, oh no, we can't do that now.
Yeah, that is a possibility. Did you interview anybody for this book, or was everybody kind of clueless about this, so there's nothing really to say other than the files themselves?
Yeah, that was the hard part, because even the people I did interview gave me very little information. So one of his assistants, Don Morgan, who worked with him in the animation studio, I talked to him, because Don Morgan actually did all of the lettering for the comic strip. And so he was aware of the comic strip and gave me a little bit of background about its history and that kind of thing, but again, couldn't tell me why it failed or anything like that. And I talked to his editor from the newspaper syndicate. Man, I don't remember his name now. It's been a while. But he was telling me, Don Michael, his editor Don Michael. So I talked to him about it, and I talked to Marion Jones a lot as well, because she worked at the studio at the time, and she was actually doing a comic strip of her own at the time as well. She was writing Ricochet.
Oh, okay.
And so she was, and maybe that's where the connection is. I have to read my book again to remember all these details. That is probably how Chuck Jones met the editor in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, going through Chuck Jones's files, I'm just curious, is there a sequel possibly in the works? Not for Crawford, but did he have enough of another unfinished project to do another book for another time, or no, this is it?
Well, there is so much material in his archive that there could be another 2 or 3 books. Wow. It is a whole warehouse full of his artwork. And it's just finding the person who wants to do that, because I'm pretty sure his family would be up for it. They were very thrilled when someone took an interest in the comic strip. Mm-hmm. But let me tell you, there is a fourth Ralph Phillips cartoon that Chuck Jones was doing before he left that is sitting unfinished. I think just rough sketches and some ideas. I don't think it actually got storyboarded or anything, but that's all in his archives. He's got lots of Mike Maltese's storyboards for Tom and Jerry cartoons. I would love to see a full book on just storyboards, especially because people don't know much about Mike Maltese. And he's credited as a writer, and people think he writes the scripts, but no, he actually drew all of his stuff as well. And there's just tons of stuff in there. In fact, if you go to page 16 in the book, I put a few storyboards that Chuck drew for foamy shaving cream ads. Oh. And those are just a few small examples, but he did about, I can't remember now, like 6 or 8 of those cartoons, and all of the storyboards for those are there. There's so much artwork and promotional stuff and animation cells for the Wizard of Oz MGM. MGM had this TV series where they would play movies, and they put bumpers that were Wizard of Oz themed to bring in the commercials and stuff that Chuck Jones did. And there's so much artwork with those in the archives. If someone wanted to take that up, that'd be fantastic. I think Chuck Jones is a name that will always, people will always be interested in.
Wow. Now, you co-authored the book or edited it with Dean Mulaney. So how did you split the roles, or did you just both kind of look it over and just proof each other's work? How did you work together?
Well, Dean is he owns the Library of American Comics. He's a general editor and stuff. Okay, and so he has to give his stamp of approval on everything. He actually let me call the shots for most of what was in here. I did all of the writing, and then he edited all of my writing, and then together we made sure that the book was laid out, in a way that made sense. And but he just kind of let me run with it with what I wanted to include, all of the sketches and thumbnails and everything as well. And how we wanted it to be presented. And then you see on the cover there, it says designed by Lorraine Turner.
Yeah.
Lorraine Turner is the one who designed this whole book and made it look so beautiful. She did a bang-up job in presenting all of this art in a way that it makes it look like an actual, I don't know, like an art book rather than a comic strip book, because these guys do a lot of comic strip reprints.
Right.
But this one is different in just the style in which they presented everything. It looks more like an exhibition catalog in a sense, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, excuse me. When you were going through the archives, I have like a soft spot for a show that did. I'm coughing. Sorry. Excuse me. His soft spot for a show that aired on ABC Saturday mornings for, I believe, 2 seasons, Curiosity Shop. When you were going through his archives, did you find any or a lot of material in relation to that series, or is that kind of like just gone?
There's not much there that I saw, but I mean, like I said, there's a whole warehouse full of it, and I only got to see a small portion. But I did find a few boxes of stuff that had Curiosity Shop things in it, a few animation cells with like Dennis the Menace and Miss Peach and Berenstain Bears, because they all had little animated segments in that show, and
right.
A lot of still photography. There were some storyboards for some of the sequences that had to do with, oh man, I have to remember. I never watched that show myself, so I don't really know. And like, I tried to watch it, and no one has any episodes on YouTube or anything like that.
You probably never will, because it was, he didn't produce everything himself. It was, he licensed certain things. And in today's climate where you have to get music rights and rights and everything else like that, you'd probably have like a 5-minute show, at best, because, it was, but, I found different pieces and parts that I remember were on the show. I was very, very young. And, but I know they did Wizard of Oz, you said Dennis the Menace, so they did animated bits, and you can find a Wizard of Oz cartoon on YouTube, and Dennis, I've seen some cells, and I think some footage, because they used that segment later on this TV special called Fabulous Funnies, so it got circulated around a little bit, but yeah, it was, it'll never be the full episodes again, which is unfortunate, and I've never seen any, I talked to collectors, do you have a full episode of it? No. But somebody's got to have some taped off the TV at some point, somewhere in the world. Yeah, it's just a matter of time. Now he had a lot of puppets. Yeah. He had a lot of puppets on that show. Was that in the archives?
I don't think that any of those were, but I mean that's a question for the people who work there, because I didn't. They only gave me access to a little bit of the actual warehouse.
Well, how big is this? How big is this warehouse? I guess that's the next question. I mean, is it so big that it's like you could just do, books and projects about Chuck Jones for days, or what? I mean, you said 3 more books, which is, if it's like this one, that's quite a bit of stuff right there.
There is now. The warehouse is. It is like, you drive a forklift through a warehouse kind of warehouse, right? But I mean, they also deal with their own, they have their own business with their own artwork and reproducing his own cells and paintings, and they have to deal with Dr. Seuss's estate as well, so they have a lot of his stuff in there also. Just the stuff that they sell and they deal with, the reproductions and such. But there's one room that's like, I couldn't tell you how big it is. It's a decent-sized room that just is full of shelves with boxes, and that's the room is just a smaller room inside the warehouse, and that's where I was in. And in that room was a wealth of material dating back to early Looney Tunes days that he was working.
Wow.
And all of, majority of it, I think, was his own Tower 12 stuff, because that's stuff that he got to keep for the most part after all of that shut down. But yeah, I mean, it's a cool place just to kind of go and be a part of.
Well, it's amazing you kept it all, because some people, I've done interviews, like I did my Total Television book where I was interviewing the guys who did Underdog and things like that, and they go, oh yeah, a lot of that got tossed out, and I'm like,
Yeah. It is quite amazing that it survived all these years, and I don't know, he must have been a pack rat, because all of that stuff, like all of these drawings and sketches, a lot of it's just like, why on earth would you keep this stuff? Yeah, in the moment you would say that, and then thank goodness he didn't. But yeah, after 6 months of doing a comic strip that never went anywhere, you're actually going to take the time and space to store these strips. And he actually worked really, really large. The originals of these comic strips were probably about, 3 feet wide.
Wow.
Way bigger than any other comic strip artist usually works. So they were all in these big file cabinets where you have, the drawers that you pull out.
Oh, the big flat drawers.
Flat there. Yeah, exactly. They were all in there. Because you couldn't fit them just in a regular box or anything like that.
Wow. Did he attempt any other comic strips, or just this one, or?
Not that I know of. I think this was the only one. At least this is the only one that I could find in the archives. I don't think he's touched comic strips again. I don't think it was a real interest of his.
Mm-hmm.
And I get the impression also that Chuck Jones kind of, and I don't know if this is true or not, but he was never satisfied. It was just kind of sit still. He always had to be busy or moving on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And the comic strip was kind of just the next thing. And he did that for a bit. Maybe he lost interest and moved on to the next thing after that.
Yeah.
But, I don't think he went back to comic strips.
Yeah. Well, going by the timeline, I think shortly, maybe it was in production. Wasn't he working on a sequel to Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century, and that might have suddenly taken his time away from it at that point?
Yeah, it certainly had stuff that was still going on. I think he was working on, what was it, the Connecticut Rabbit and King Arthur's Court was probably in production around that time as well.
Yeah, and there's a few shorts made, like they did a Bugs Bunny Christmas show that I think was part Chuck Jones, part DePatie Freeling, and they combined their efforts and things like that. So, yeah. So yeah, I guess the Looney Tunes resurgence kind of came around that time, so they all got busy doing that again. But it is kind of interesting of what would happen if this had taken off, if suddenly Crawford was just like a big hit. But
right, because if he was spending all of his time doing this, maybe he would have farmed out the chores to somebody else. Maybe he would have got some other people to do the artwork. Or maybe he would have moved more into this area. Mm-hmm. Who knows? He also did there is a trading card set, the baseball one, with all those characters, which is, so I mean, he didn't shy away from doing more sort of just static print illustration like that. But he stuck with animation. I think that was his biggest love, though. So
now, there was never any. I mean, I think you've already answered, but I'll just double check. There was never any thought or consideration for Chuck to do a comic strip, say, on the Roadrunner or Bugs Bunny or any Looney Tunes, right? It's always just, in this case, his own creation. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's from what I can tell. Yes, because there were Bugs Bunny comic strips.
You're
but
right.
They were always farmed out to, was it Robert McKinson's company that did those, I think?
For a time, yeah. Probably around the time that this Crawford strip appeared, it was an artist named Lee Holley, who recently passed away. He worked on Dennis the Menace for a while, and then he had his own strip for about 20 years called Ponytail. So, but he did work. He did work in Friz Freeling's unit, and I think he did work for Chuck Jones too a little bit at Looney Tunes in the late '50s. So, I mean, he was well versed in the Looney Tunes, and he had the assignment in the mid to late '70s for the comic books and the Bugs Bunny comic strip, and so he drew the dailies for a few years there, and then later on just retired. So, and then I've seen other hands draw it later on, but I don't have all the names off the top of my head. But it's just kind of curious if Chuck was really ambitious, would he say, let me put my stamp on a Roadrunner Coyote comic strip or something? But I guess he never really felt that way about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess not. Or maybe he wanted to and he was never given the opportunity. But the comic strip, just based on how he approached Crawford, I don't think that would have been something that was on his radar really at the time. There are a couple of references to Roadrunner and Bugs Bunny in the comic strip in Crawford and Morgan. Yeah. You have to go through and find there.
Well, even on the back cover, the back cover is beep, 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 beep.
Oh, yeah. That's the one, That's the one.
That was the Roadrunner, the world's fastest moped, so there you go. And that probably is why, I had the question, because it's just sitting right here, and I saw beep, beep, and I go, how come we never did a Roadrunner comic strip? Anyway.
I know, right?
Is this your only book, or did you work on any other books for the Library of American Comics? I kind of thought you were affiliated more with them and with other projects as well, not just this one.
Yeah, actually, I am in the middle of a series of For Better or For Worse reprints right now.
Okay.
And that's a more modern comic strip from the 80s and 90s.
Right.
And I'm Canadian. I live in Vancouver, and Lynn Johnston, the cartoonist who did For Better or For Worse, is Canadian as well. So this strip is very loved in Canada. It's kind of like the I guess the most loved Canadian comic strip, I guess you could say. But it's huge also, like all over the world, the United States as well.
Right.
I read it when I was a kid. I took those books out from the library all the time. And the draw with For Better or For Worse is that she aged all of her characters in real time. She did this comic strip for 30 years, and the kids at the very beginning were Elizabeth was just learning to walk, and Michael was a couple years older. And then when the strip ends, Elizabeth is getting married, and Michael has a couple of kids already. Like, there's actual 30 years of real-time growth in these characters.
Right.
And Lynn Johnston just moved to Vancouver a year ago, or a couple years ago at this point, I think. Yeah. And so when I found out she was moving to town, I got to meet her, and I really want to reprint her comic strip because her syndicate is owned by Andrews McMeel. Andrews McMeel is not interested in publishing comic strip books anymore, even though they own a newspaper syndicate. And so all of these people who have excellent comic strips, like Luann and stuff, they don't put out these collections anymore. In fact, they don't even reprint the old stuff. They now do manufacture on demand. If you want to buy an old For Better or For Worse collection, you can order one through them, and they'll just print it up when it comes. So you won't find these books in bookstores anymore. But so I took this to Dean, and I said, Dean, Lynn Johnston would be interested in doing For Better or For Worse. Do you want to do it as well? And he said, absolutely, I do.
Okay.
Let's do it, and let's give it, the gold star treatment. So we have really nice hardcover For Better or For Worse books, and they are collecting about 3 years, in some cases 3.5 years at a time, in one collection. And we're going to publish all 30 years in 9 books, dedicating 3 books per decade. So I'm just in the process of working on Volume 3 right now. Volume 2 came out back in July.
Okay.
And that'll be all of the 80s. And we are we're putting all of these these strips back in order, because all of the old For Better or For Worse books that were published, and there are lots of them.
Yeah.
They kind of played with the order They would rearrange strips if they needed to. Lynn, if she didn't like some of the strips, she wouldn't add them to the collections. And the Sundays, a lot of the early books didn't include the Sundays, and when they did, they weren't in color. It wasn't until the last few of the later books when the Sundays were in color. And then when Lynn retired from doing the strip, the syndicate started rerunning the strips from the beginning, and so she would start to make little alterations. She would play with the order of the strips again, fix a few continuity errors. She would update some of the language. If there's a reference to Cheryl Ladd, she just switched that for a more contemporary movie star. That kind of stuff.
Wow.
And she also hired somebody to recolor all of the comic strip, all the Sunday strips, because back when she did this in the 80s, she was limited to her 64 colors, and now we don't have those limitations. So she recolored all of the Sundays with modern coloring techniques. And so when I pitched this to her, I said, I want to put all of these strips back in order. I want to date them all so that we know that they're in order. I want to put in all of the ones, even the ones that you didn't like, I want to put all of them in here. And I want to restore all of the color back to the way they were when they originally were printed in the newspapers, so that people really get a sense of what this comic strip was like when people were reading it for the first time in the 80s. And she's like, well, I guess that's okay. Oh. She wasn't there, because if she's not proud of it, why does she want it out there? Right. But I managed to talk her into it. I think she saw the value of making this available like this, because she has the collections with the new coloring jobs, and she has the collections with the stuff, the reordering, whatever, the way she wanted it. Mm-hmm. But this is more for a historical value.
Right.
And I'm very happy with the way the first two volumes have come out. The first printing sold out really fast, mm-hmm. Of the first volume, which is really good. And the second volume came out really well also. And like I said, I'm in the middle of getting volume 3 together, and that one should be coming out, I think, in April. Mm-hmm. And then we'll just have to keep on going until all 9 volumes are out.
Well, you said a whole mouthful there that made me think of a lot of different questions. So I'll just kind of go from what you were talking about, different things. Sure. So we'll probably go different directions. Well, obviously it was a popular strip in the United States. I knew she was from Canada, but I mean, is it just because she's Canadian that it actually was really popular there, or was it just popular on its own merits and she just happened to be Canadian? I didn't know if that was...
Well, she placed the strip in Canada. So the For Better For Worse family, the Pattersons, they actually live in Ontario.
Right.
And there were a lot of Canadianisms in there, you'd make references to milk being sold in bags rather than in jugs or cartons, which is from what I understand, is a very unique thing to Canada.
That's true.
And it's like she'd always put in a Remembrance Day strip where people are wearing poppies on November 11th. That's
okay.
Canadian.
Yeah, I've seen ones like that, and I guess as an American or whatever, I never really thought about one or the other. I just said, oh, okay, but I kind of accept a lot of things. Dogs flying on houses, battling red barons, and things like that. So, but, I have to admit, I liked her strip, but I never read it so meticulously. So, I mean, it just kind of was like, but I did know the characters aged. I said, hey, this is like Gasoline Alley, It's like,
exactly, yeah, it is like that. Except nowadays, like, Walt Wallet is like 120 years old, and he's still alive.
Right.
and the strip is still going on today. But For Better or For Worse, she treated these like real people. So as they aged and as they got to an appropriate age when they should die, the characters did die.
Yeah.
And that's just that's something that added to the drama of the story. Mm-hmm. She's really funny, so there's like the humor in the strip is great, and she treats things sort of like a gag a day, but with an overarching story that carries on. And I really think that these collections are a great way to read the story because you don't have to wait a day to find out what happens next.
Right.
You can plow through 3 years of these characters lives in a fairly short amount of time, and it's a blast.
Is it truly autobiographical or kind of pseudo-autobiographical? I mean, obviously, she had kids. I know the basic story of her life, that she had kids and they grew up, so obviously she had inspiration for that. But, I mean, how accurate was it?
Especially in the early years, it was quite accurate.
Yeah, okay.
And in the fact, like, the dad, John, in the strip was a dental hygienist, just a dentist, and her husband was a dentist, and that kind of thing. And so a lot of the gags and the strips were taken straight out of her own kids' mouths. And there's a storyline that's coming up in Volume 3. It's going to be at the beginning of Volume 3, where her husband and her brother go off on a little fishing trip, and their boat capsizes, and they get stuck on an island and have to spend a few days there while Coast Guard searches for them. And that story actually happened in real life to her husband and her brother.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
it's those kind of things. Yeah, the brother in the strip is a musician, plays the trumpet. That's like her brother in real life is a musician and plays the trumpet. It's once you get to the 90s, when she was a lot more sensitive about how her kids are being portrayed, and because especially as the strip grew, and it grew in popularity to the point where she's known across the nation, across the continent, and even overseas, she wants to distance her own kids with the kids that are in the strip. So they go in much different directions. So the career paths that the kids in the strip do are not the same as the career paths that her actual children do. And then, of course, she added a third child into the mix in the 90s named April, and she never had a third kid herself. So that's obviously not true to life.
Okay. So it got slightly more fictionalized as you went along.
Yeah.
Now, I know she retired and stopped the strip, but didn't she do the strip for a time? Maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't she do a strip for the time before she completely quit, that she kind of redrew or filled in the blanks on older strips? Correct me if I'm wrong. There's something that she was doing near the end. Okay, go ahead.
There's a weird transition. As she was, there was a point where she was sort of semi-retiring, and so she was continuing to do the story, but then there would be a point where Michael would be talking to his children or his daughter, and his daughter would say, "Tell me about when you were a kid." And so Michael would talk to her about when he was a kid, and then it would go into 2 weeks of repeats of some of the earliest comic strips. And then after the 2 weeks, it would go back into the story, and she spent a couple more weeks developing the characters or whatever and telling new stories. And then they would revisit old strips again, and they kind of did that. And so then, at a point, she stopped the story, the ongoing story, and the repeats continued. But then she, like you said, she started putting in new strips, but tried to emulate her style back from 1979. and put in new gags and flesh out some of the characters and fix some of the continuity issues and that kind of thing. And eventually, those ones that she drew got fewer and fewer until it's just straight reprints now.
Okay.
She still draws the odd strip here and there, like if Easter in 1983 was on a Sunday, but now it's being reprinted in 2018 and it's on a Tuesday. No, I mean, Easter's a bad example. Easter's always on a Sunday. Valentine's Day. If Valentine's Day is on a different day, she'll draw a new strip to stick in there. And she's still updating things too, because there is one strip that came up just recently for Father's Day where the punchline was something like Bill Cosby is like the father figure that everyone strives for, or something like that. I don't remember what the punchline is, but it included Bill Cosby. Now, these days we're not going to use Bill Cosby as the example of fatherhood.
Right.
So she changed the punchline to that gag out of necessity, I think. So there's things like that still happen.
So that's kind of bizarre. Forgive me if you're talking to Lynn, and I met her once. She's a very nice lady. But it's like, is it just she can't let go, or she just wants to just fill in the blanks, or what? It's just kind of weird that she doesn't do a clean, I'm done, I did this 30 years, on to other things. Or is she just like to have her toe in the water?
Yeah, she does it now. Now most of it, the business is run by her daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the daughter who keeps track of what needs to be changed and that kind of stuff. And so she'll bring those things to Lynn. Like the Bill Cosby thing. It's like, obviously we can't print this. What should we do? She'll bring it to Lynn to come up with a new gag for it. Or if it's like, like I said, Valentine's Day falls on a different day, Lynn doesn't keep track of that. So Katie will take it to Lynn and say, I need you to draw me a new strip for this day, and so she'll do it. She has retired.
Okay.
She doesn't do. She's moved on to other things. The comic strip is being run by the syndicate and by the company that's run by her daughter.
Okay.
So it was just I don't remember how long it was that she was doing those. She calls them. I think she calls them new runs.
Uh-huh.
Not reruns because they're new, but they're in the old style. She was doing that for a couple of years and then phased that out and actually just stepped back.
So are you
stepped away from it.
Is the eventual plan to reprint those two in the final volumes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now that was a big question when we first came up with that, and like, do we put those at the beginning because they're part of the story that's at the beginning?
Yeah.
But I was adamant when I said I want this to be like people experienced it in 1979. So I don't want any of those new ones at the beginning here. So we'll put them at the end. We will include them because we want to include every strip, but we'll include them chronologically.
I think you did the best thing, because to me it's kind of like when George Lucas messes with Star Wars. It's like, I want to see Star Wars how it was in 1977. I mean, it's fine if you messed with it later and you updated it, but I want to see the original one as it came out originally, and then, you can see what you did with it later, Yeah, I know you said that you convinced her to put strips she didn't like back into it, but did you have any real major pushback, or is she pretty much accommodating with it all?
You know what? I got no real pushback other than just the occasional. I need to think about that kind of at the beginning. She's been great. She has been completely hands off with these books. Mm-hmm. She's trusting us to do what we want to do. And of course, we before it goes to print, we give her everything so that she can check everything, and her daughter checks everything as well to make sure that everything's in order, or there's no misinformation or whatever, that kind of stuff. We definitely don't want to cut her out of the process, and but at the same time, she has been very gracious in letting us take control and running with it. And so we're doing our best to provide something that I think that is respectful to her and to the book, even stuff that she's not as proud of. It's just I'm really, really happy with the way that they're turning out.
Okay. Because I'm just curious. One wonders what if Charles Schultz lived 10 years later and they started putting out the complete Peanuts, if he would have been so accommodating to because I know originally, like 2 years of strips, like in the early 50s, never saw reprint until they did that series. It's like, he just really was down on those early strips, and so, I could kind of see any other artist kind of cringing on the early years. Sometimes it's like the characters weren't drawn the right way or whatever.
Absolutely. Well, and I can understand that. I mean, who likes to look back at some of the stuff that they did when they were first starting out? Every artist is like that.
Right.
But at the same time, if this were 10 years ago even, maybe she wouldn't have been as on board. But I think she's just at the point where she's like, let people have what they want. And, the last few books that Andrews McNeill published included all of those strips, all of those new runs inserted into the story. Mm-hmm. So if people want to read it that way, those books are available also.
Yeah. I had gotten a few of those, and then when you started this new series, I was like, okay, we're starting again. But I'm sure, and I didn't, know for sure, but I figured, because it was always tradition that there would have been missing strips that you recompiled back and stuck them back in the right spot. So, that always kind of baffled me on any strip. I guess it was for pacing or time or space or whatever. That certain strips were eliminated. But I never knew that till years later. I was saying, well, they got all these strips. Why are they deleting some? I mean, they can make another book with those strips. I don't know. I don't know. But So, that's why I tend to like what Library of American Comics does overall, because, you try to be complete. I mean, there's other publishers, too, nowadays that try to be complete, but it didn't used to be that way, so, I'm glad there's more respect for that.
There is. There's definitely a push with all of the comic strip reprint companies that are out there now with, Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly and stuff, to provide all of these like a complete unbroken series, and it's just wonderful to have that available, and that people are willing and wanting all of that information. This will be in 50 years from now. This will be a great way to study her work. She'll be long gone, and this will still be around, and we'll be able to look at it and see how her style developed over the years. To see how her writing, how her joke telling, how her timing, all of that, how it developed and became what it became, and that goes for Charles Schulz as well. Like, I can't believe it. We have 50 years of Peanuts all collected in books, readily available for us at any time we want. It's just incredible. Right.
Now, can you speak for any of the other Library of American Comics editions at all, or no?
So I do work with them on. I manage all of their social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all that kind of stuff, and so I'm well aware of all of the books that they're publishing now. Okay. So if you want to talk about any of those, I can probably give you a few words.
Okay, well, this kind of relates to For Better or For Worse and for the other series. Is this, For Better or For Worse, is that guaranteed to be published all the way in its entirety, or will people get tired of it, say, after volume 3 or 4, and then it just stops? I mean, because I have other ones that I know that have been published that are incomplete, which I wish there was a third volume, like Family Circus, King Aru, and Archie, and things like that. So is there a chance of that happening where it wouldn't be complete and it would just stop like in the mid-90s or something?
It all depends on the sales. It really does.
Okay.
Because it's not financially responsible to print books that nobody is buying.
Okay.
So in the case of King Aru, those sales just weren't there for us to continue. And same with Family Circus.
Yeah.
Family Circus is a hard one because that's a strip that everyone knows and loves.
Yeah.
But you only really love it one day at a time. You don't really need a whole book of them, right?
Well, the thing is, since we stopped on that one, it was Volume 3 definitely was solicited, and I was looking forward to it because I had never seen those early strips, and I go, at least reprint the rest of the decade, and it's like, I don't care if you do them after the 70s because, it's just, it's become the butt of a Dilbert joke, it's like, so, I get that, but, in those early ones, they actually were kind of funny, but also the dad looked completely different, and I was like, I've never seen this stuff, and so I'm just like, I can't wait for Volume 3, it was solicited, and then it went away, and I was like, I can't believe it didn't sell at all,
So. Yeah, I love Bill Keane's 1950s style. It was so cool. It was just, he morphed into something that became a little bit more generic, I think. But that early stuff of Family Circus is just fantastic. Yeah, I mean, me personally, because I'm so invested in For Better For Worse, I am on board for all 9 volumes.
Yeah, and I expect it will be published. I mean, it's certainly much more popular, than Kingaroo. I could totally understand that Kingaroo didn't make it past the second volume. I'm actually shocked that the second volume came out on that one because I bought the first one, and it was a friend of mine. Oh yeah, volume 2 came out. I go, really? And so I did find that one. But people have asked me about the Archie one. Is like you did Archie volume in the 40s, and then it jumps to the 60s, and it's like there's a lot of people who've asked me, because I've written an Archie book with Craig Yo about the history of Archie. They go, are they ever going to do the other Archies? And I go, I don't know. Maybe they didn't sell. Maybe they don't have access. I don't know. So I'm asking you, what is the story on that?
The Archie books that were published were the volumes where we actually had the materials for it.
Okay.
So there's no second volume to the 1940 stuff because we don't have good enough quality material to print a quality book.
Okay. So
if anyone out there does have those, if you're listening to this podcast and you do, send me an email at Kurtis, with a K, Kurtis at loacomics.com, and we'd love to see what your collection looks like, because Archie's, especially with, the new show and everything like that, Archie does pretty good.
Okay.
On the flip side, even long-running strips like Little Abner, Little Abner started out strong, and then the sales just got fewer and fewer, and we released Volume 9 and had to put a stop to it, so there won't be a Volume 10 of Little Abner, unfortunately.
Well, do you think what suffered on Little Abner is because Kitchen Sink basically covered the same territory, or,
that could be. I think that, but those ones, I don't know, they were formatted differently, and we tried to present it in a different way, but, if you have the material once, maybe you don't need it again. But something like Steve Canyon, Steve Canyon is on I think it's on volume 9 as well, and the sales for that, we're looking at that, and we're just going one at a time. Like, we'll do another one if the sales are good, and the sales continue to be good, so we do another volume. There's another volume coming out early next year.
Okay.
So that's that. But then on the other side, we were publishing the Disney comic strips as well, and did 3 volumes of Treasury of Classic Tales. Yeah. And the sales just weren't there for us to do Volume 4. Volume 4 is solicited in the back of the book. Yeah. But we're not going to do it. Yeah. Which was really surprising, because I thought these are Disney books. There are so many Disney fans out there, they should be gobbling this stuff up. But they weren't.
Yeah. But I don't think that was one of the more successful strips that Disney did. I mean, it ran for a long period of time, but, adaptations of live-action features sometimes are like, really? They want more Mickey and Donald. I'm not saying that was a bad idea. Actually, that was another one I was looking forward to that, okay. Are there any others more like the Archie one where it would be popular, but you just don't have the material?
Yeah, so we're in the middle of reprinting all of the Superman comic strips, and we have all the material for the Sunday comic strips. In fact, the final volume of the Sunday comic strips will be coming out in 2019, and we will reprint it every Superman Sunday comic strip from the beginning in the Golden Age all the way through to the 60s when it stops, which is remarkable. And we have printed almost all of the dailies, but there's a period in the 50s that is elusive. We don't have those. Wow. So we are not going to be able to finish printing those books until someone comes forward with their collection. And believe me, Dean's been looking. He's been looking all over the place, high and low, talking to collectors, but nobody seems to have clipped these strips and saved them. So we will publish the book as soon as we get the material, but right now the material is just not there.
It's just shocking that,
I know it's Superman, right?
Well, yeah, and also it's not like I'm using Archie also. Archie and DC, they never stopped publishing. They never got bought out by anybody else. I mean, I guess Warner owns DC, but they kept publishing all these years. So wouldn't they have kept an archive of something? Microfiche or something? Seems.
Yeah, you think so? Well, I mean, I think you could probably find microfiche, but that is not adequate for reprinting.
Okay.
So it's not. We need actual tear sheets where we can scan at a really high resolution, because microfiche is just so small, and it's just not. Yeah, it doesn't bump up to high resolution very well.
Okay.
To printing standard. So
and of course, the originals could be anywhere, right? If they even
originals,
exist.
oh God, who knows? Yeah. They are either hiding somewhere or don't exist anymore. But again, if any of you out there know where they are, we would love to see them.
Yeah.
And that's why, we're on the Dick Tracy volume 25 or something like that.
Yeah.
And Little Orphan Annie 18. Both Chester Gould's and Harold Gray's estate they kept everything. So all of those books are all being shot from syndicate proof sheets.
Oh.
And that's why we're doing them. We're doing them all because we have the material.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful, and it looks so great. We're not working off of old rotting newspaper copies.
Oh, wow.
But those volumes, we are, I think Dean especially, with Dick Tracy and Little Orphan Annie, he's committed. I don't even know if it's at the risk of sales. He's committed to reprinting all of them, and we're so close to the end. There's only about 4 or 5 more volumes of Dick Tracy.
So what year are you in? What year are you in, roughly?
We just entered the 70s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and Dick Tracy started in 1931, I think.
31, yeah.
Right?
I think so, yeah.
So we've done all of them, and we're very close to the end, and we can do it. It's going to be amazing.
Then how far are you on Little Orphan Annie, then?
That one is, we just entered the 50s,
Okay.
1950 to 51. That book just came out last week, and that's volume 15. And Harold Gray, I can't remember when he stopped that strip.
Yeah, I don't either. I know Dick Tracy didn't. Chester Gould stop in 77, wasn't that right?
Was it 77 or early 80s? I can't remember. It was somewhere around there.
Yeah.
But, no, actually, yeah, if it's 77, that kind of makes sense with the number of volumes we have left.
Yeah.
But, yeah, Harold Gray, there's still a little bit more to go. But, like I said, we have all of the material. Mm-hmm. We just have to publish it in a way that makes financial sense.
Got it.
Yeah, it's really cool to see all of these coming close to an end.
Now, are there any?
10 years, 15 has been doing this.
Now, is there any series you'd like to do? I mean, I know, like I said before, other publishers, so you go, oh, can't do that because they're doing it or whatever. But, is there any you'd like to get, but it's just an iffy proposition, or you just don't have the material?
Well, I think all of the most popular strips have been done now.
Yeah.
Anything that we would want to publish now would be falling into kind of a little bit more obscure territory. Mm-hmm. And, are people actually going to buy this just based on our own recommendation? There will be a few people that'll be out there like, oh, that's a Library of American Comics book, so I'm going to check it out.
Right.
But these days, I think we've kind of hit all of the big names.
The two I would love, I will give my recommendations.
Okay, let's hear it.
Whether you'll get them or not, but I mean, if you can do the Chuck Jones one, you could do these two. The Bullwinkle strip that Al Kilgore drew, I think it ran for like 2 years. Yep. And the Richie Rich strip that Warren Kremer drew, which I think ran for a year and a half.
Right.
And
so that, I think, if you notice, with the publishing schedule that Dean's doing now, we're leaning more toward the licensed material.
Yeah.
We could do the Chuck Jones book because the Chuck Jones has the name recognition to sell the book.
Right.
And then we're doing like Spider-Man and Superman and Batman and stuff. because those characters will sell the books.
Yeah. Well, that's why I said. Bullwinkle. I didn't say Doctor Smock, which I would love to have a collection of that, but nobody wants.
Exactly. Yeah. So I could see doing that, or even Library of American Comics is distributed by IDW, and IDW has the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles license, and there is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic strip, so that could be in the future. Who knows? Those kind of things are all definite possibilities because they have a more commercial viability than Dr. Smock. Myself personally, there is a fantastic strip that I love by Frank Tashlin called Van Boring that he did in the 30s. And I discovered this strip just by accident, reading through one of Tashlin's books, and I love it. It's so good. His cartooning is just fantastic. And he did the strip for about 3 years.
Yeah.
It was just a Monday to Saturday strip. And I searched all these different microfilm archives for the strips, and I put them all up on a Facebook page. If you search for Van Boring on Facebook, you can see the entire run of them up there. And I would love to see that published, but nobody's going to buy it. There will be very few people who buy it. Frank Tashlin, even his name is not going to sell a lot of copies of that. But I would love to see it done.
Right. And there's one other one I was just going to mention. It just slipped my mind already, so I'll have to come back to it. Let's see. Oh, I know what it was. It came back because it's right on the spine of my book in front of me. So when I was doing my Pocket Full of Dennis the Menace book, I was talking to Scott Ketchum, who is one of Hank Ketchum's sons, who actually works on the strip now, and he handles the licensing and everything. And he said, Fantagraphics is doing the daily books, and they only did 6 of them, and then they stopped, even though they were going to carry on all the way into the 90s when Hank retired. And there was never a book to this day that has any Dennis Sunday strips. Now, granted, Hank Ketchum rarely drew the Sundays, but Scott was kind of interested, in some sort of compilation that way of the Sundays or carrying on the dailies. Would you ever consider something like that? Or if you said, if it didn't do that well with Fantagraphics, we're not going to take a stab at it. Something like that.
Well, there's definitely some research to go into that. Why did Fantagraphics stop the ones that they did?
Yeah.
Was it because people weren't buying them? Because if people weren't buying them from them, people aren't going to buy them from us either.
Right.
And that would be great. I mean, I'd love to see Dennis the Menace. I don't get to call any of those shots. So that Dean gets to make all of those decisions as to, what gets published and not. But, I'd love to see, especially early Dennis the Menace Sundays would be fantastic.
Yeah. Because
I loved Hank Ketchum's style back then. It was so great.
Now, on the Sundays, the story was Ketchum did it for about 6 months, and then he handed it over to Al Weisman. And Weisman did the comic books everybody loves. So Weisman did the strip for the Sundays only for about 6 years, and then Lee Holley took over from that, same Lee Holley, and then different hands did over the years. And my suggestion was to do like a best of that had like a sampling of each artist, but if one just wanted to do the Al Weisman years, even then, that would just be the 50s, and I think there would be an audience for that, but And apparently, Scott Ketchum does have access to all that stuff. It's just that, needs a publisher. So anyway, I don't know. If you want his contact, I can give you a contact offline. But anyway, so.
Okay.
But anyway, I was just kind of curious how that works. What is and you answered it well, because it's like, okay, I wasn't sure about the Archie thing, if it was just bad sales, which seems weird because there's so many Archie books. How could this not sell? And then you said, well, no strips, and I go, got it. Okay.
Yeah. You want to have a good, decent quality of material, and also Dean. The company is really small. Library American Comics is only Dean and Lorraine doing all of the work, with me working on the For Better For Worse books. And then another associate editor, Bruce Canwell, who does a lot of the writing and editing and stuff like that too. But that's it. So the amount of books that they pump out, when it's really just the two of them doing it, Dean and Lorraine, it's incredible. So if something has to be put on the schedule, they have to make sure that they have time for it as well. So if they have a batch of Archie Sunday strips, but like all of the colors are off register because it's a newspaper printing and stuff like that, that takes an incredible amount of work to actually make it usable, and their time is valuable. So they need to be able to find the material that's going to not create too much of a headache for them.
Right. Now, how does IDW fit into all this? Are they just the publisher? Do they have any say or financial input or even people input if need be? Or
yeah, well, I mean, they do have financial backing to all of the books, and so Dean works with them closely to make sure that the books that that his schedule works with IDW's schedule, and that IDW is okay with the amount of stuff. So, like, if something's not selling, IDW gets the report and says to Dean, you're going to have to take a look at this and take it, and they have to take all that into consideration. So
no more family circus.
Exactly. Yeah. And especially, if they are the ones who are they're technically publishing the books because they are the publishing house. They're the distributors and stuff. So if it's not going to work out for them, they don't want to have warehouses full of our books just sitting there not doing anything. Right? The material the product has to move.
Yeah, I was just curious how that worked because.
Yeah. It's basically an imprint.
Got it. Okay.
So it's like your Craig P.O.'s in the same.
Right, and I was going to ask about that. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and but IDW is fairly hands off at the same time. I mean, they know Dean and they trust Dean, so they'll give the green light to projects, and then Dean can do whatever he wants with it as well. They work really well together.
All right. Well, let's see. I guess this is the For Better For Worse is really what's taking your time nowadays. But are there any other projects you're working on or plan to work on in the future?
Well, I don't. For Better For Worse, I don't think I can handle at the moment more than one book series. So I'm going to stick with this one for now. And we'll see what happens after this one is done. I would like to keep on working. A comic strip that I would really love to do is it's another contemporary strip. It's Robot Man. Do you know that one?
I do.
It's now called Monty.
I didn't know how long it lasted, but
it's still going to this day.
It is? Okay. I never see it anymore, so I don't know. Okay.
I'm pretty sure the syndication is pretty low on it now, but it's I loved it back in its day when Robot Man was the original character, and that strip has such an interesting beginning because Robot Man was created by a greeting card company who wanted to do merchandise. And so they created stuffed animals. They did an animated TV special. They had kids' books, board games, whatever, and they had a comic strip to go along with it. So they hired this guy, Jim Menace, to do a comic strip, and then the company, I don't know if the company folded or if they just didn't do anything with Robot Man, but that whole thing just went away. Robot Man went away, but Jim Menace was able to gain control of the character in the strip, so he did it, and he went in his own direction, and it has a very irreverent, offbeat humor that's sort of, a lot of it's kind of a little Monty Python-ish, and like he puts in a lot of pop culture references, and I found it really funny in the 80s. It kind of reflected that, I guess, Generation X kind of thinking as well. And then in the 90s, he wrote out the the robot character, because he says he never really liked that character, and introduced this new guy named Monty, and that's where the strip is today. But I would love to publish the Robot Man years, so I'm going to see if I can convince Dean to do that after For Better or Worse. I don't know if that will sell. It probably won't, but who knows? Yeah.
Right up there with Kangaroo. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. But I can give a plug. So I have another podcast that I do. It's called the Epic Marvel Podcast, and I just talk about the little chunks of Marvel history. Mm-hmm. Classic Marvel. I don't usually dip any newer than 2000, so I talk about the 60s through the 90s. Mm-hmm. The different characters, and I do a lot of interviews, and so I contact a lot of comic creators, the artists and writers and editors of Marvel Comics over the years, and interview them about their work, and so people can check that out if they're interested in that side of things. That's a side project for me.
Very good. Any other things to plug, or websites, or ways to contact you, or?
Well, I also do a Library of American Comics podcast as well, and you can see that on our website, or you can find it on iTunes. I do that with Dean, and we give a little bit of behind the scenes on the different books, and people are free to write in and ask questions, and Dean is very open to answering people's questions. So, Mark, if you want to ask more Archie questions and that kind of thing, you can send me your questions, and I will address them on a future episode of our podcast.
And bug them about print just one copy of Family Circus Volume 3. So, anyway,
Mark.
Just my own personal copy. Thank you.
We're starting to think about how to get material out digitally. Mm-hmm. And what that looks like, and what's a good method and market for that. Because if we can cut out the actual printing costs mm-hmm. and just because we have this material, maybe people would buy Family Circus Volume 3 as a digital book rather than a physical book.
Yeah, I might. I mean, I prefer it to be a hardback, but anyway.
So would we, of course, absolutely. But if people aren't going to buy it, then. Is it better to have it released digitally than not at all? I don't know.
Right.
We'll see.
Okay. All right. I guess that's all the questions I have. We went all over the map. Do you have anything else to say or anything else to plug at this time?
No, I mean, people can email me if you want. I said this before. It's Kurtis with a K at loacomics.com. Right. And I'd be happy to chat about these books or any others. For Better or For Worse is coming up on its 40th anniversary in 2019. So look out for some special events. I'm sure that Lynn and her crew, and hopefully we can be involved in that too. We will get some For Better or For Worse special stuff out there. And keep buying these books.
Yes.
I'm sure Mark likes to plug his books all the time as well, and I'm going to do the same.
All right, sounds good, and definitely get the Chuck Jones book.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a good one.
All right, well, I thank you very much for being my guest today, and you do Thanksgiving in Canada a month ago, right? So.
Oh yeah, that's long gone.
Of course, this won't even air. This won't even air for a couple more weeks, so it'll be old news in the United States too. But anyway. Have a happy holidays. Let's do that. Let's keep it preaching here.
You too, Mark.
All right. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you for listening, and thank you again, Kurtis Findlay, for being my special guest. Episode number 16 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a patron of Fun Ideas Productions, and like I said at the beginning of the show, if everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help to have this podcast continue. This has been the Fun Ideas Podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2018, Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you very much, and have a good night.